Thank you for joining us for this discussion of the results from our inaugural staff satisfaction survey. All of you, our staff and technical service employees, you are critical to the success of Penn State and our missions of education, research, and outreach. Without you, Penn State would not be the world-renowned institution it is today. We launched this survey to better understand your experiences at Penn State as staff and technical service employees, and to identify areas of strength and opportunities for improvement. I was so happy to see how strong the participation rate was. Over 52% of our staff across all Penn State locations took time to tell us about your experience and share your thoughts. I understand from our partners at Modern Think that an average response rate is only about 43%. So this is a testament to the commitment and passion that we all have as a collective community. And again, I really thank you for taking the time to respond to the survey. Today, we will be reviewing the results from the survey and then talk about how we're going to address the opportunities and challenges highlighted by your feedback. With me today is Christy Helms, Senior Director of Talent Management for Penn State HR, who helped with the survey effort. And also joining us is Rich Boyer from Modern Think, the third-party firm who administered the survey. Rich will review where Penn State received positive feedback, areas of opportunity, and the response distribution across staff, as well as how we compare to other institutions who have conducted similar surveys. So Rich, I thank you for being here today with us, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Jennifer, thanks for getting us started. I am indeed honored to have the opportunity to share with the Penn State community what we found out from this most recent engagement survey. And I appreciate your comments, Jennifer, as it relates to the purpose behind the survey, to give us some insight into the experience of staff here at Penn State. That's exactly what this instrument's designed to do, to give us insight into the day-to-day experience, the levels of engagement, and the overall workplace quality experience of staff. I would also be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that a survey like this is, by its very nature, a communication tool. We surveyed and sent the survey invitation to over 13,000 people. And as you mentioned, Jennifer, we had a very strong initial response rate. We'll talk more about that here momentarily. Before we get into data, I want to just contextualize this a little bit more. In addition to this being a diagnostic tool, giving us insight into the experience of our employees, there's a potential number of other applications, strategic applications, if you will. We're going to talk about a couple of those, but we've seen our clients over the years use data sets like this to inform strategic planning processes, to support accreditation efforts. And in the case of Penn State, where we have some relatively new leadership, it's the terrific vehicle for leadership transition to help them understand, either as a function of their formal listening tours or to supplement that, the day-to-day experience of employees. In the case of Penn State, there are some very direct connections we can make to the values. I was pleased to see that Penn State has an articulated set of institutional values: integrity, respect, responsibility, discovery, excellence, community. And as we segue momentarily into looking at individual items on the survey, you'll see many of the items map very directly to these values. We're going to talk about one of the opportunities that emerges here around performance management. When I think of performance management, it's certainly related to a value of integrity or a value of excellence. This value of respect we see reflected also in some of the items related to our recognition programs and the impact they're having. So in addition to providing a baseline to help leaders understand what the experience is of their employees today, we also have the opportunity to make these strategic connections. And in this case, to see, are we really living the espoused values the way that we aspire to? Let's segue now to a brief overview of the survey instrument itself and the survey timeline. We deployed the survey February 10th through February 24th. And the first data point you've already heard is our overall response rate at 52%. Momentarily, we're going to look at individual items as well as groups of items. And you'll hear me talk about some benchmarks. So we've got two benchmarks that you'll hear me talk about today. For those who may not be familiar with Modern Think, we deploy surveys like this at colleges and universities across the country. We've been doing this almost exclusively in the higher ed space since 2007. We also happen to be the Chronicle's partner on the Great Colleges to Work For program, a recognition program we do every year to understand where the best places to work are in higher ed. So because of that work, it gives us unique benchmarking capabilities. The Carnegie classification benchmark, I suspect some of you, and many of you are familiar with that, but the Carnegie classification is a framework for categorizing colleges and universities largely according to their mission and the number and type of degrees offered. It's used for policymaking as well as benchmarking. Because of our work with the Great Colleges to Work For program, we also have what we would characterize as an aspirational benchmark. We call it the honor roll. Those are the institutions that are recognized in the most number of recognition categories in the annual Great Colleges to Work For program. On the box on the right, you'll see an overview of the instrument itself. There are 67 belief statements, which we asked you all to respond to on a 5-point agreement scale. There were also 22 benefit satisfaction items on a satisfaction scale as opposed to an agreement scale, 2 open-ended questions, and 4 voluntary demographic questions. In terms of response rates, let's dig a little bit deeper. Again, the 52% response rate is an excellent response rate for the first-time deployment of a survey like this. We generally, as you heard Jennifer speak 2 moments ago, we would expect your response rate to be around 43%. It's generally where we are. This speaks to both the level of intention with the communication strategy prior to deploying to the survey, so people would know and understand why this was an important initiative. It also speaks to the commitment to staff from employees to tell us what you think. You'll note that the technical service group had our lowest scoring response rate at 19%. While that is lower than the others, when we do the statistical analysis on that, given the 484 respondents of the 2,400 plus in that group, we can still operate at the 95% confidence level with a plus or minus margin of error of 4%. So while that response rate is lower, we don't have any concerns about the integrity of that data set. In terms of the belief statements, right, we're going to spend most of our time here together today. You'll see on the top of this slide the response scale. It was a 5-point agreement scale with a not applicable response option, which frankly is very infrequently selected. We've developed this chart to help us make quick meaning of what is a very robust data set. And what we're going to be doing in our time together here is a version of what's often called top box analysis. In this case, we're going to call it top 2-box analysis, because we're going to combine the strongly agree and agree response options, characterizing that as a positive response. And we'll do the same on the opposite end of the response continuum with the strongly disagree and disagree. This is intended as a rule of thumb. Many of these items, frankly, are more difficult to do well on than others. But as a general rule of thumb, if you have aspirations of being a great workplace, of having high levels of employee retention, of having the capability of attracting top talent, if you want to play at that level, the elite level, we typically want to see positive response at the 65% level or higher on most of these items. I think it is important to note that nobody gets 100% on any individual item or on the collective average. We expect to see negative response on every one of these items, and anything under 15%, we're also going to put in that elite level. I think it is important to note that when you see positive response below 55%, or a negative response above 20%, that should be indicators that those are areas that we need to pay attention to. We're going to categorize these items in our first pass according to the groupings of the items. So we call these core dimensions. So all those 67 items, we can group together into thematically related groups. We don't pull these groupings out of thin air. When we talk about job satisfaction support or professional development, we know from the academic research that these are the kinds of things that have significant impact on faculty and staff and the overall experience of the culture. For those of you who do survey research on a regular basis, we get to these through first the exploratory and then a confirmatory factor analysis. Happy to speak to that for those who have questions offline, but for our purposes today, we'll simply talk about the core dimensions. We'll now segue into looking at some results at the core dimensions. On this slide, we're looking at the positive, neutral, and negative across the groups of the items of the individual groupings. So these, again, are the averages of the items that comprise each of the 10 core dimensions. And you'll note that 5 of those dimensions, we are playing at that 65% level or higher today. There's a lot of good things happening at the Penn State today in terms of the employee experience. You'll also note that there are 5 areas where we've got some opportunities. Looking at those dimensions in more detail will help us point us in the right direction where our efforts are best spent. We're going to unpack some of these, and particularly as we look at a top 10, bottom 10. But before we do that, I want to provide some additional context. And for the next 2 slides, we're going to look at the positive response of Penn State on these dimensions, and we're going to compare it to the Carnegie classification benchmark. And you'll note that on many of these, you are very similar to what your Carnegie classification peers are experiencing. When you see a gap or a difference of 5 percentage points or more, that's a gap that can be closed in relatively short order. On some of the larger gaps, notably here on this slide on the performance management, as well as on our communication, collaboration, and confidence in senior leadership items, a little more substantive gap, it's going to require a little bit more effort. But in terms of contextualizing where Penn State is today, by and large, you're very similar to many of your Carnegie classification peers. I mentioned the overall benefit satisfaction earlier, 22 benefit satisfaction items. You did very well on the benefit satisfaction items. When we asked about the experience of benefits meeting one's needs, we had a 74% positive response, a 6% negative. On this slide and the following, we're looking at the satisfaction levels across the benefits rated high to low. You'll note the lowest scoring of those was employee recognition programs. And as I alluded to earlier, that's arguably connected to a value of respect. One of the ways that we might operationalize a value of respect is ensuring that we've got a culture of recognition. Let's look at a few headlines. We're going to segue now into some individual items. So on this next group of slides, the number on the far left is simply the number of the item in the sequence of the survey, followed by the belief statement. Then we have the positive response and the negative response for Penn State, and then the Carnegie classification. Among the things we know as a function of this research is that great workplaces start at the local level. Hence, we ask item 25. If you're unhappy in your department and your team, it is unlikely that you'll experience the institution as a great place to work, regardless of how iconic the brand may be. At 78 and 5, this is an excellent finding. Item 51 is considered the classic net promoter question. Would you actually recommend working here to somebody that you care about? At 63 and 11, a little bit bigger gap than our Carnegie peers, but nonetheless not far off our 65% target. Items 55 and 57 are two other types of net promoter questions. You'll note that 51 and 55 correlate pretty closely at 63 and 11 and 63 and 8. And even a better finding when we look in the rearview mirror and decide whether we would make the same choice at 70 and 8. A strong foundation on which to build on the net promoter items. Let's look at a few more headlines. Among the things that really stand out is this tremendous sense of connection to mission and a similarly strong sense of pride. Item 5 is an important item. Most of the academic research on employee engagement would point to this as being a particularly strong driver of an engaged employee. The understanding that I know what I do and how it impacts the institution's mission. When we see strong findings there, that certainly is a contributing factor to an overall sense of pride, as reflected in item 36. Item 54 is the outlier on this group of 3 items. And this is a particularly important item from a great workplace lens. Again, one of the things that we know about great workplaces, one of the things that differentiates the best workplaces from the merely good workplaces, is a perception of a special and unique culture. In many worlds, particularly in HR circles, we talk about our employment brand or employee value proposition. Item 54 gives us some insight into the collective understanding of our community of that employee brand. What are those differentiating qualities that make this a special and unique community, a special and unique place to work? Let's look at 2 more headline slides. We're going to come at it from a risk management, a human capital risk management lens, if you will. While these may not be the most glamorous items on the survey, they are indeed important as it relates to the institution's support for making sure that we're providing for the well-being and the care of our community, our students, faculty, and staff, ensuring that there's understanding of what the resources, procedures may be if we feel like we've been aggrieved in some form or fashion, and an overall support for our well-being. I think one of the things that we've seen in this post-pandemic environment at colleges and universities across the country is a heightened focus on well-being. We think that's a good evolution. Historically, we've talked about work-life balance and wellness. The well-being construct typically is more holistic. In this case, we ask both about one's mental and or emotional well-being. At 70 and 13, that's a nice finding, particularly in this environment. Second half of our risk management items, again, perhaps not glamorous, but important. And when I look at these items, I'm reminded of your values of integrity, your values of excellence, right? Do people know where to go to report misconduct? Are they comfortable speaking up? And do they have confidence in the system? I want to speak to 67 for a second. You'll note on these 3 items, we don't have benchmark data. That's because these items were unique to the Penn State survey. We have asked items like 67 with other clients, and the pattern that we see on this grouping of 3 items is not atypical from what we see. The nature of misconduct investigations, necessarily much of that is behind closed doors for legal reasons and good reasons. So to see a lower finding on 67 versus 68 or 66 or 65 is not uncommon with items of this nature. So we're going to segue now from headlines to an abbreviated SWOT analysis. And on the strength side of the ledger, we've got 5 that really stand out. And we're going to look at supporting evidence for this momentarily. But as you've already seen on a handful of items, when we look at the items related to job fit, to sense of pride, to connection of mission, to well-being, you do very, very well. You also do well on the supervisor effectiveness dimension. Here also, this is worth highlighting because in most of the academic research on employee engagement, this is considered a primary driver, the experience of one's immediate supervisor. This is a strong foundation on which to build. When we talk about inclusion, belonging, and community, we know is, again, a function of this research, when an institution is intentional about to ensure folks feel included and opportunities to participate, that informs the individual experience of belonging. And we've got a very specific item about belonging. And when there's a collective sense of belonging, that further enhances the sense of community. So good news here, you do well on that item. Also not lost on me that one of the articulated institutional values is indeed community. On the opportunity side of the ledger, performance management and accountability shows up. You'll see examples of that in individual items momentarily, as are there opportunities in this progression of communication and collaboration, which, while are related, are different. You've seen a preview of the confidence in senior leadership being one of the lower scoring dimensions, and we'll look at the compensation item as well, as that was one of the lower scoring items in the survey. We're going to collect some supporting evidence simply via the top 10 statements. So these were the items where we have the highest positive response. A couple of those you've seen in the headlines, so we won't dwell on those, but I do want to highlight those that we've not talked about. In particular, in this case, item 29, this is what would be considered a welcoming environment type item. In my department, we welcome diversity in all of its forms. At 86 and 4, an excellent finding. In terms of that well-being, one of the ways that we manifest a culture of well-being is support for work-life balance, not just via our policies and practices, but where the rubber really hits the road. The support one actually gets from their supervisors, what we're asking about in item 47 at 86 and 5, again here at elite levels. Item 2 is the proverbial autonomy item. I'm given the responsibility and freedom to do my job, the antithesis of being micromanaged. An excellent finding at 83 and 5 for the first time deployment. Second half of our top 10, when we look at well-being, we also see that when asked about the supervisor support for the genuine well-being, we have very positive response on that. Item 24 is related to well-being, the belief that the work we do is meaningful. We know from the research that when one believes the work they do has impact, that it is indeed meaningful, that it contributes to their overall well-being. Item 25, we've seen already. Item 63 and 19 are 2 of the more difficult supervisor items as they relate to the experience of credibility. Do supervisors do what they say they're going to do? Do they ensure the proverbial level playing field? Are they consistent and fair? At 76 and 8 and 76 and 9 respectively, solid findings for the first time deployment of a survey. Looking at the supervisor effectiveness, given the import of that, let's look at a handful of the other items. Item 3, arguably, I think one of the most important things a good supervisor does is make expectations clear. We ask about that in item 3. Certainly providing feedback is related to professional development. Item 7, we're asking about the supervisor supportive feedback. Items 12 and 19, again, credibility items. And let's talk about item 20 as it relates to your value of discovery. If we have a value of discovery or a related value of innovation or continuous improvement, if we're going to have a culture that's indeed conducive of that, item 20 is one we would want to do well on. At 74 and 9, that's above our 65% threshold. The resources, it's a common reframe at many of the clients we're serving these days is a finding of resource constraints. These are among the more positive findings that we've seen in this environment. Item 4, we're very specifically asking about resources, 31 about facilities, workload in item 59, and item 34 I alluded to moments ago when we talked about the overall experience of benefits meetings my needs at 74 and 6, a very good finding. When we look at staff well-being, again, looking at the supporting evidence for the strengths on our abbreviated SWOT, items 15 and 47, the first and the last, speak to the direct support from one's immediate supervisor. 33 and 39 and 44 really are more related to the institutional policies, practices, programs, and support. Collectively, they're strong across the board. Every one of these items above our 65% threshold and below the 15% negative. In terms of our inclusion, belonging, and community items, we have yet another welcoming environment type item in item 40. Item 48 is the belonging item. Items 50, 49, and 56 are related to institutional commitment to inclusion, belonging, and community. In this environment that we're currently in, we would characterize these findings as very solid. Let's revisit our strengths and opportunities with a particular focus on our opportunities as we segue into the bottom 10. In the spirit of transparency, we're going to look at the top 10. We're going to look at the bottom 10. We're going to look at some of the supporting evidence for both of those. But segueing into our bottom 10 items, item 60, I believe senior leadership will take action based on the results of this survey. Here also we see the asterisk as this was an item was unique to Penn State. I can share with you that I've made similar presentations to a number of leadership teams at Penn State, and I've found them to be very invested in this process and eager to have a data set so that they can be data informed in terms of what actions we need to take moving forward to make it an even better place to work than it is today. Item 42, while it doesn't specifically say shared governance, it's certainly related to shared governance. It's related to a value of collaboration or a value of community. At 30 and 35, one of our lower scoring items. Item 35 is a belief statement. That's related to the earlier data we saw in the satisfaction component. And as I mentioned moments ago, it wouldn't be a stretch for us to connect this to our value of respect. The compensation item, item 11. Typically, this is the most challenging item on all the surveys that we do. And at 41 and 33, frankly, you're not that far off your peer benchmarks. To contextualize that even a bit more, I can tell you that our honor roll institutions, and this would be from the honor roll and the Carnegie benchmarks from 2024. The 2025 data hasn't been released yet. But even at our honor roll institutions, they are at 55% positive, 23% negative. So even at the best places where we can find, they don't meet that 65% threshold we identified earlier. Item 53, in most cases, correlates very closely with item 54, which was the item about the special and unique culture. When there is a commonly held perception of a special and unique culture, what makes us a special community, that tends to bring a community together, regardless of the size. So I'm not surprised to see this level at this, and again, would not be a stretch to connect this to our value of community. Second half of our bottom 10, and here we see 3 performance management items as well as 2 senior leadership items. 17, 16, and 18 are certainly performance management. We tend to think of performance management holistically, not just about your review process. Item 17, we're specifically asking about the review process. Item 16, we're trying to get a sense of the perception of the proverbial level playing field as it relates to promotions. And item 18 speaks to our individual and in some cases collective ability to deal with issues where performance may not be up to standard or behavior may not be congruent with our values. The performance management items also are among the most difficult items, and here also they're among our bottom 10. Item 27 and 41 are certainly related to senior leadership communication, 27 around the vision, 41 more generic. And I think it's cliche to say, but indeed we are living through challenging times in the higher ed world for lots of different reasons. And that does create additional challenges as it relates for senior leadership communication. That's not to say that there isn't room for improvement. Let's look at some additional items related to some of what we've talked about. If we think about performance management, certainly coupled with that is professional development. If we think about professional development holistically, it starts even before professional development opportunities. It starts in the onboarding. Most of the colleges and universities that we see do a great job with onboarding of new students and transfer students, but are somewhat less successful in our onboarding of new staff. You'll note that even among your peer benchmark, the Carnegie classification, we're not necessarily reaching the 65% threshold. While separate but related to onboarding. Item 28, do you have access to the training you need? Good news here, better than our onboarding item. Item 6 gives us more insight into the experience of the opportunities to develop skills, whereas item 10 is really about understanding career advancement and opportunities for progression, linear progression in an organization. We've talked a little bit about collaboration. Let's talk about communication, collaboration, and change collectively. Item 43 gives us insight into the quality of our dialogue. Do we discuss and debate issues respectfully to get the best results? Item 26 gives us insight into that sense of cooperation or collaboration across departments. Item 42 we saw related to shared governance. Item 22 is the change management item. And item 53, the sense that we're all on the same team. So no doubt in terms of this higher ed environment, lots of change. You'll note again here also the Carnegie classification benchmark is below that 65% threshold. These are indeed challenging times in the higher ed space. And let's look at our confidence in senior leadership item, group of items rather. So 32 is the most positive of our senior leadership items. This has to do with the perception of the confidence in the capabilities of senior leadership. At 57 and 14, it's a good finding that this is indeed the most positive. We've talked about items 27 and 41. Item 37, do employees believe that senior leadership actually cares about them, that shows a genuine interest in the well-being of employees, and that we're not just invested in them in the roles that they have or the titles. At 45 and 23, one of our lower scoring items, as is 45. We started with values over the course of this conversation, this presentation. I've tried to make some individual connections there. I want to end with that value of community. You heard Jennifer in her opening remarks talking about the importance of community and the importance of understanding the employee and experience and what's going well and where there are opportunities. To the extent that you've got questions or want to learn more, Penn State has developed a comprehensive website. So you can learn more about this survey and the process and the next steps at staffsurvey.psu.edu. And on this note, I'm going to pass the baton back to Jennifer to talk about next steps.
Thank you so much, Rich. I know that was a lot of information, but first, again, let me say to our staff, I want to thank you. Your honest and candid feedback has led us to here and has provided us the information that we need to make meaningful improvements to the Penn State work experience. I am excited to tell you that even before Rich shared results with you today, we have already started to take action on some things. As you saw in the presentation, it was very clear from the feedback that performance management is an area we need to focus on. We had already updated the performance review cycle timing to align it more closely with the fiscal year. But because of your feedback, we understand we need to make more changes to this process. And so I hope you all saw that we recently sent a follow-up survey to staff members and managers focused specifically on the performance management process. We are going to be taking that information and hosting focus groups in November to get even additional feedback with the goal of having an improved process by next summer. And all of this is because of your feedback. I am happy to see that there are many aspects of the work experience that our staff members love. I know Rich touched on this, but I was very happy to see how highly our staff members rated the benefits that Penn State offers and the relationship with their supervisor. I'm also excited to have concrete information about some of the challenges you all face in your daily work for Penn State. Having this information is a first step to making meaningful change. We can't address it if we don't know about it. As all of you know, higher education, as Rich alluded to, is facing a very challenging time. And there have also been significant changes right here at Penn State, including the announcement that we'll be closing campuses in 2027. And as Rich alluded to, this is reflected in these results. I want to take a moment to talk about where we as a university go from here. Penn State leadership has discussed these results, and we acknowledge that we have work to do to connect with you all as we navigate these times of change. We are committed to doing that work, and we ask you to join us in that effort. Unit leaders will be sharing unit-specific survey results with employees at the conclusion of this event. We have directed unit leaders to develop action plans with input and participation of their employees with a planned deadline during the week of December 1. These action plans will be designed to build on our existing strengths and to address areas of change. We are not going to be able to fix everything at once. We have asked units to focus on 2 to 3 areas in the short term so we can see meaningful change begin to happen across Penn State starting next year. We want to be able to measure our progress and our success, and so we are committed to running this survey again in 2027. This survey is part of a long-term plan to improve Penn State, and it will take time for us to accomplish our goals. I hope you will join us as we continue this very important process. If you're looking for more information about the survey, I invite you to visit staffsurvey.psu.edu. We'll be posting this presentation there along with additional information. Again, I want to thank you for joining us today, and I look forward to working with all of you to make Penn State the best place to work. Thank you.